It was just another ordinary day at the dealership. The sun was barely up, and the morning rush had already started. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the lingering smell of leather from the cars on the showroom floor. I worked as the receptionist, greeting customers, answering calls, and making sure everything ran smoothly. But there was something about today that felt different. I had just finished a conversation with a regular customer, a middle-aged man who was looking for a new sedan. As he walked out, I turned to see a man standing at the entrance of the showroom. He looked out of place, to say the least. His clothes were worn, his shoes scuffed from years of use. He wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to walk into a fancy car dealership. I watched as he approached, hesitating for a moment before entering. He didn't look like he could afford the kind of cars we sold, but something about him made me pause. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, as if he didn't mind being judged for how he looked. "Can I help you?" I asked, smiling politely as he came closer. He looked up at me with tired eyes, his face marked by a kind of quiet exhaustion. "I was just looking around," he said softly, his voice almost hesitant. I nodded, keeping my distance. "Feel free to look, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask." The man wandered deeper into the showroom, glancing at the shiny cars with a look of longing on his face. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. There was something sad in the way he observed the luxury vehicles, almost as if he were dreaming of a life that wasn't his. But then, something strange happened. A security guard, Jerry, noticed the man. I knew Jerry. He was a tall, burly guy who didn't take kindly to anyone who seemed out of place. I saw him approach the man, his steps heavy and deliberate. "Hey, you need to leave," Jerry barked at the man, his tone sharp and uninviting. The man froze, looking up at Jerry with confusion in his eyes. I'm just looking." "I don't care. You're not welcome here," Jerry said, grabbing the man's arm roughly. "Let's go." I watched in shock as Jerry started dragging the man toward the door. The poor guy tried to pull away, but Jerry's grip was too strong. I wanted to say something, do something to stop it, but I was too stunned. It all felt so wrong. Something wasn't right, but what? I stood frozen at my desk, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me. The man, struggling to free himself, glanced back one last time at the cars he'd been admiring. His expression was one of disbelief, but there was also a hint of something else, something deeper that I couldn't quite place. As Jerry dragged the man out the front door, I saw something strange happen. The man's gaze shifted, and his hand reached into his pocket. For a moment, I thought he was going to pull out some kind of weapon, but instead, he retrieved a sleek business card. He handed it to Jerry, who barely glanced at it before shoving the man outside. I don't know why, but I felt an overwhelming urge to know what was written on that card. As Jerry turned to head back inside, I rushed over to the door and snatched it from the ground. My hands trembled as I read it. The card simply said, "John Matthews, CEO of Matthews Motors." My heart skipped a beat. This couldn't be right. How could this man, this poor, scruffy man, be the CEO of anything? I had to be mistaken. But then a thought struck me. Matthews Motors was one of the biggest car companies in the country. They had a reputation for producing high-end vehicles, and the name was known nationwide. I had seen their cars on the road, their ads on TV. I had even read about their expansions in the news. If he was really the CEO, then I had just witnessed a man who was treated like dirt, dragged out of his own company. A chill ran down my spine. What was going on here? I couldn't shake the image of the man's face as he was escorted out. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting back to him. Why would someone like him come to a dealership, only to be treated so badly? It didn't make sense. It was as if there was a story I wasn't being told, and I needed to know what it was. After a few hours, the dealership quieted down. The morning rush had passed, and the salespeople were sitting in the break room, chatting idly. I took the opportunity to slip out and see if I could find out more about the man. I headed to the front of the building, where Jerry was standing guard near the entrance. He seemed calm now, as if he'd forgotten all about the incident earlier. I approached him cautiously, my curiosity getting the better of me. "Hey Jerry, do you know anything about the guy you kicked out earlier?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He gave me a dismissive look, shrugging his shoulders. Just some bum who thought he could buy a car with nothing but pocket change. I don't know why he thought he belonged here. But his card. I started, unsure if I should bring it up. What card? Jerry asked, his face suddenly serious. I hesitated, then showed him the card I had picked up. His face turned pale when he saw the name on it. John Matthews, he whispered, looking up at me in shock. Wait, are you telling me that was the CEO? I nodded, feeling a knot form in my stomach. It seems like it. Jerry looked like he was about to say something, but then the door to the dealership opened. A man in a sharp suit walked in, his presence commanding attention. He looked around and, spotting me, made a beeline toward me. I'm looking for John Matthews, the man said, his voice steady. I was told he was here earlier. Can you tell me where he went? My mouth went dry. Could it be? Could the man I'd seen earlier actually be the CEO? The realization hit me like a freight train, and I had no idea how to respond. The man in the suit, who was clearly in charge, stood waiting for an answer. His eyes were sharp, and he didn't seem like the kind of person who appreciated being kept in the dark. I glanced over at Jerry, who looked as if he'd seen a ghost. I'm not sure where he went, I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. But there was a man earlier, wearing clothes that weren't. Was it him? The suited man interrupted, his voice tight with urgency. I nodded slowly, still trying to process everything that had happened. Yes, he didn't seem like he belonged here, and then Jerry asked him to leave. He gave him this card. I showed the man the business card, my hands shaking. The suited man took the card from me without saying a word, his eyes scanning it quickly. When he looked back at me, his face was a mixture of disbelief and anger. This is a disaster, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. What do you mean? I asked, confused. John Matthews is one of the most influential CEOs in the industry, he explained, his tone now urgent. He's been out of the public eye for years, living a quiet life away from the media. We're launching a new car line with his name on it, and this could ruin everything. I could hardly breathe. The man we had all assumed was a nobody was John Matthews, the very person whose company we were selling cars for. And yet, Jerry had thrown him out like a common criminal. I couldn't believe it. Is he? I started, but the man in the suit cut me off again. I need to find him, he said, looking at me with a new intensity. And you. He turned to Jerry, whose face had drained of color. You better pray he doesn't decide to make a public scene out of this. You could lose your job, your reputation, everything. Jerry looked like he might collapse right there. The reality of what had just happened started to sink in. For a moment, it felt like everything was moving in slow motion. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. How could Jerry have been so careless? How could we all have been so blind? Just then I heard the faint sound of a car engine revving outside. I turned toward the window, my heart racing. There, in front of the dealership, was a sleek black sedan. I recognized it immediately. It was the latest model from Matthews Motors, the very kind of car we sold, and probably one of the most expensive vehicles we carried. The car came to a slow stop, and the door opened. Out stepped the man, the real John Matthews. He was no longer the disheveled man we had seen earlier. Now he was dressed in a sharp suit, his hair neatly combed, exuding an air of confidence that was impossible to ignore. He wasn't just the CEO, he was someone who commanded respect. And I could feel the tension in the room rise as everyone realized what was happening. I held my breath as he walked toward the door, his eyes scanning the showroom with an almost knowing smile. John Matthews entered the dealership without a word. His presence seemed to fill the room, and for a moment, nobody dared to speak. It felt like the air was thick with the weight of everything that had happened. He looked at Jerry, who was standing frozen near the door, and then at the suited man, who had been so desperate to find him. I assume you've been looking for me, John said coolly, his voice surprisingly calm. The suited man, still looking stunned, stepped forward. Mr. Matthews, I had no idea you were here, he stammered, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. John raised an eyebrow. You didn't know I was here? Or you didn't know who I was? The suited man swallowed hard. I apologize for the confusion, sir. We didn't mean for this to happen. John didn't look angry, he looked more disappointed. His gaze turned toward Jerry, and I saw the way his eyes hardened. And you, he said, his voice low and steady. You think it's acceptable to treat people like that? Jerry seemed to shrink under the weight of John's words. He mumbled something under his breath, but it was clear he was too afraid to defend himself. Listen, John continued, his voice still calm but carrying an undeniable authority. I don't care what your assumptions were about me, but I do care about how people are treated here, especially when it comes to my customers. He turned his gaze back to me, his eyes softening just a little. I appreciate you trying to help. I nodded quickly, not sure what to say. I could feel my heart beating faster, a mix of relief and nervousness flooding through me. Everyone in this room, John said, looking around at the staff, needs to understand that people aren't always what they seem. We all make judgments based on appearances, but sometimes we're wrong. He paused, letting the words sink in. I've been working with this company for years, quietly behind the scenes, but I will not stand by while anyone gets mistreated. There was a long silence, and for a moment no one knew what to do. Jerry stood still, his face red with embarrassment, while the suited man fumbled for something to say. I simply stood there, my mind racing. Finally, John looked at Jerry one last time. You can keep your job, but I expect you to learn a lesson from today. Treat everyone with respect, no matter who they are. He turned to walk toward the door, but then paused. And as for you, he said to the suited man, I'm going to need you to handle this with more care from now on. No more assumptions. With that, he left the showroom, his footsteps echoing in the silence he left behind. The air seemed to lighten just a little, but the weight of what had happened lingered. None of us would forget the lesson we'd just learned. In the days that followed, things changed. Jerry was put on probation, and he spent the next few weeks working closely with John's team, learning the importance of respect and professionalism. I could see how much it weighed on him, and honestly, I couldn't blame him. But he had learned, just like the rest of us. As for me, well, I had a new appreciation for the people who came into our dealership. I had always believed in giving everyone a fair shot, but John Matthews' quiet lesson had hit me harder than I expected. People aren't always what they seem, and sometimes the most unassuming person in the room holds all the power. I couldn't help but smile a little, knowing I'd witnessed something few people ever would. The day a man who seemed like nothing became the embodiment of everything we were taught to respect. And as for Jerry, well, he wouldn't be forgetting this lesson anytime soon. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this story touched you and brought some inspiration your way. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and share with others who might love it too. And if you want to see more stories just like this, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. Your support means the world to me and helps me create even more content for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below. Until next time, stay amazing.